A clay crock sits in a Polish cellar in 1890, packed with shredded cabbage, salt, and nothing else. 6 weeks later, it contains over 28 distinct strains of live lactic acid bacteria, more than any probiotic pill sold in 2024. In 1905, the average American household fermented between 40 and 70 pounds of vegetables per person per year. By 1975, that number had collapsed to under 2 pounds. A single tablespoon of traditional sauerkraut brine has been measured at 1.5 trillion colony-forming units, roughly 100 times the count printed on a $30 probiotic bottle. The bacteria did not vanish. The crocks did. Welcome to Root Keep. This route leads back to a forgotten kitchen technology that once delivered more probiotic power than yogurt, free in every home. Then an entire industry figured out how to replace it with pills. A potter in Neolithic China shapes a vessel from river clay, not knowing it will outlast empires. Chemical analysis of pottery shards at Jiahu, dated between 7000 and 5700 BC, reveals traces of fermented rice, honey, and fruit, evidence that people were harnessing wild microbes to transform food millennia before written history. The same invisible process, lactic acid fermentation, would echo across continents and centuries. When Roman legions marched, they carried barrels of cabbage preserved in salt brine. Pliny the Elder, writing in the 1st century, described how cabbage kept in brine sustained soldiers far from home, its sourness a mark of its preservation. 1,000 years later, a Korean scribe records in the Samguk Sagi that families packed salted vegetables for winter, letting thyme and salt create flavors unknown to the raw harvest. In each case, the method is strikingly similar. Vegetables submerged in salt, shielded from air, left to ferment in their own juices. By the 18th century, the pattern appears again in the logbooks of naval quartermasters. Captain James Cook, preparing for the Endeavour's long voyage, orders barrels of sauerkraut for his crew. The fermented cabbage, rationed out week by week, helps stave off scurvy on seas where no fresh greens survive. Across eras and cultures, different hands repeated the same simple steps: chop, salt, submerge, wait. The technique required no electricity, no refrigeration, only patience and an understanding passed down by observation. The continuity is astonishing. A thread running from Neolithic pit to Roman camp, from Korean winter storehouse to the deck of a British ship. The process, refined but never fundamentally changed, carried living bacteria through generations, quietly shaping health and survival. The method worked, and so it endured. A century ago, the sound of cabbage being shredded and the tang of salt in the air signaled more than the coming of winter. In kitchens from Krakow to Cleveland, a stoneware crock was not just a vessel, it was a promise. Among Eastern European immigrant families in the American Midwest, a fermentation crock often stood at the heart of the home. It was common for a new bride to receive such a crock as a wedding gift, a dowry item meant to last a lifetime and to carry forward the memory of her mother's hands. These crocks, handed down or purchased from local potters, were filled each autumn with cabbage, carrots, or beets, layered with salt, and pressed beneath a wooden weight. The process was simple. 3 ingredients, vegetables, salt, and water, left to ferment in the cool dark for weeks. No electricity, no refrigeration, just patience and a watchful eye. The ritual was communal. Neighbors gathered to chop, pack, and share stories while the crocks lined cellar shelves. In Polish villages, the largest barrels, known as kapustniarki, sometimes served a whole street. The practice crossed the Atlantic with immigrants, finding new life in the farmhouses and tenements of the Midwest. By 1918, the United States Department of Agriculture recognized the importance of this tradition, issuing Farmers Bulletin No. 881. The bulletin offered precise instructions for safe, effective sauerkraut fermentation, warning homemakers to keep vegetables submerged, skim mold, and mind cleanliness. It was a government nod to the quiet expertise of women who had never needed a manual. For these families, the crock was more than storage. It was continuity, a living link to ancestry and survival. The loss of this practice is not ancient history. Its traces linger in attics, cellars, and the stories of those who remember a time when every kitchen was its own laboratory of life. Clarence Birdseye stood in a Labrador fishing camp in 1924, watching fish freeze instantly in the Arctic air. That observation led to U.S. Patent 1,823,647, a method for flash freezing foods using a brine ice mixture. Bird's Eye's process locked in texture and flavor, and within a decade, the Consolidated Ice Company, soon to be Bird's Eye Seafoods, was shipping frozen vegetables to American cities. In 1936, General Foods acquired Bird's Eye's company, launching the first mass-market frozen dinners. The promise was clear: food that stayed fresh for months. No cellar, no mold, no waiting. As the frozen aisle expanded, the Federal Food, Drug, and Cosmetic Act of 1938 entered the scene. Section 402 set strict standards for food safety, giving regulators new power over anything deemed adulterated, including home-fermented products with unpredictable acidity. Companies seized the moment. Internal memos from General Foods described traditional fermentation as old world, laborious, and potentially hazardous, urging a campaign to rebrand frozen and canned goods as modern essentials. Advertising agencies followed orders. By the late 1940s, Frigidaire's magazine spreads promised no more sour smells from the cellar, while Westinghouse radio spots claimed 78% of women preferred packaged purity to home pickled risk. General Electric's 1953 television campaign showed a gleaming freezer as the heart of the American kitchen, eclipsing the stoneware crock. The freezer became a symbol of progress, while the living ferment was recast as a relic. The bacteria never vanished, but the practice and the hands that carried it were written out by law, by marketing, and by the cold logic of efficiency. In high school classrooms of the 1950s, the sound of bubbling crocks and the sharp scent of brine faded into memory. State Education Board records show that by 1953, fermentation labs were quietly replaced by freezer and convenience food modules. Textbooks such as Modern Home Economics dropped entire chapters on sauerkraut, kefir, and pickling, substituting glossy photographs of canned peaches and frozen dinners. Minutes from curriculum meetings document the rationale: prepare students for the modern kitchen, not for the cellar. As home economics instruction narrowed, a parallel shift was underway outside the classroom. The 1950 census recorded a rural population of 36%, down from 49% in 1920. At the same time, women's workforce participation climbed from 31% in 1940 to 38% by 1960. With more families living in cities and more women working outside the home, the hours once spent chopping, salting, and tending crocks gave way to minutes at the supermarket freezer aisle. In this new world, traditional skills vanished from both curriculum and daily life. The loss was not simply a matter of convenience, it was a break in the chain of living knowledge. By 1965, Nestlé filed a trademark for Pro-Biff, launching a campaign that promised science-backed gut health in a single serving. Fermentation, once a household art, was now a commodity. The same bacteria that had thrived in stoneware crocks were repackaged as capsules and flavored drinks, sold back to consumers who no longer remembered the taste of living brine. The practice disappeared, not the microbes. What was lost were the hands that knew what to do with salt, cabbage, and thyme. In 2021, a team led by Dr. Justin Sonnenberg at Stanford published a controlled trial that put fermented vegetables head-to-head with commercial probiotic capsules. Their findings were striking. Participants who ate a daily serving of fermented foods such as sauerkraut, kimchi, or brined pickles saw a 47% increase in gut microbiome diversity. Those who took probiotic supplements, even in high doses, showed no measurable change. The data, published in Cell, revealed that traditional ferments introduced a broader spectrum of living bacteria, including core lactic acid strains found in historic food cultures. A follow-up study in Nature Microbiology confirmed that these foods seeded the gut with bacteria not present in pill form, and that the effect was both rapid and robust. The evidence is clear. The living brine in a jar of sauerkraut delivers a complexity and abundance of microbes that no capsule can match. At the Mayo Clinic in 2023, a group of IBS patients began a simple intervention: a daily portion of fermented cabbage. Over 12 weeks, their symptom scores dropped by 30%, a change that rivaled or exceeded most pharmaceutical trials. Stool samples told a deeper story. Levels of butyrate, a short-chain fatty acid linked to gut health, more than doubled. This clinical outcome echoed findings from a 2019 survey in Poland, where families practicing home fermentation consumed sauerkraut with a median live bacteria count of 1 × 10 to the 10th colony-forming units per gram. These numbers far surpass the microbial load in most commercial yogurts. For people in these studies, the benefits were not theoretical. Fewer cramps, less bloating, and a measurable shift in the gut's chemical environment followed the return of a food their great-grandparents would have recognized. The living brine in a kitchen crock delivers more than tradition. It delivers results. Industrial food systems replaced centuries of living ferments with sterile, shelf-stable substitutes, erasing a practice, not the bacteria themselves. Today, a glass jar, salt, and thyme still yield more probiotic diversity than any capsule. The knowledge is free, but its recovery depends on what hands choose to remember. Share your thoughts below.